I am very pleased and honored to be in conversation today with Carolee Schneemann. The goal today will be to give a brief introduction to Carolee's exhibition currently on view at the Museum of Modern Art PS1 through March 11th. That's tomorrow. So as you make your way through the Armory show today and tomorrow, try to make time to take one last glimpse, another view, to make another visit to this outstanding exhibition. I'd like to thank Armory, the Armory Show and Armory Live, and especially Ellen Poyle for making this conversation possible. I envision this as a relatively casual and free-ranging conversation in which we can provide an introduction to Carolee's amazing work. So, just to begin, perhaps, with a few words about how one encounters Carolee's work at PS1. You begin in the entrance on the first floor at PS1 with this work, a collage of eye-body photographs just recently composed exclusively for PS1. It's a magnificent work, a kind of confrontation, both warm and affirmative, kinetic and dynamic, a project of almost a kind of scouring I felt when I encountered it, that scraped away preconceptions or sensations or just the feelings of the street or the bustle of the commute. That it was a refreshment into the space. I'm curious to know a little bit more about how this came to be. It references Eye-Body, a canonical work from 1963, and it is a reformulation. Perhaps this is a place where we could begin.
Okay. Well, it's a work based on a sequence of mistakes. The first mistake was a very bad sequence of prints from the early photographs of Eye-Body 1963. But they were ample, and I thought, I'll do something with it. I'll shred it. I'll tear it up. So I started tearing these images quite a while ago. I started when I was working part-time in a wonderful empty loft in Montreal, where I was teaching part-time, and then coming home on the train to upstate New York, where I'm based. These torn up photographs lay around on my floor for a very long time. I just couldn't solve it. And they were beginning to really annoy me when the curators from PS1 came up to the studio and they said, "Oh, this is perfect for the entranceway. We can use this. We know where this could go." I said, well, then I better finish it and get rid of this thing. So it's come into its own. I'm very delighted. And I think it's an example of the uncertainties with which I work. I never think I've solved my intentions properly. It takes a very long time for me to feel secure about it, and I'm often sitting on a work for many years until somebody comes and says, oh, this is really important. Let's do something with it.
That's a wonderful way, I think, to proceed into the next encounter in the show. So from these details, that notion of uncertainty, I think, is really powerful. The working over of this material from your studio floor to then the gallery walls at PS1. To then this canvas from 1960, given a very nice spotlight in that first gallery, firelights, a really beautiful canvas. The ochres, the yellows, the kinetic marks. There's a real generosity to the mark making, the flourishes, the sense of both a cohesive exploration of the surface of the canvas, and then yet it's so suggestive of something beyond, that there's an energy that is propulsive outside of the canvas alone.
Yeah, the work is always about an intensity of interior rhythms. And I concentrate on being able to find an incremental energy between the elements that I'm producing. So it's a conversation between my material where I'm responding to its implicit energy, and that energy is always influenced a great deal by music. I listen to Charles Ives or Bach, or I feel energized before I approach my materials. And so it's like a very solitary, physicalized, visual dance.
That notion of an incremental exploration and that energy that is explored and from moment to moment across the surface, I think is really well encapsulated in how that painting is encountered. Firelights is first seen on the wall as one enters into floor 1, gallery 1. Behind firelights is fuses, perhaps one of your most notorious, most famous works, a film documenting your life, and especially the explicit sexual intercourse and expressions of lovemaking with James Tenney. Notions of music and rhythmic energy are evident in such vivid and generous ways in that film. For me, watching the film and, in a sense, stepping back and forth between the gallery in which Fuses is presented, the small black box theater with an absolutely beautiful preservation transfer, and then back into Firelights, I had a sense of that film behind Firelights, that there was a canvas that was then activated and then in communication with that film, that there was a very generative dynamic between the stillness of the canvas and its energy, its movement, and then the movement of the film and its stillness back and forth between these two spaces. It seemed to be an absolutely ingenious way of introducing not only your perhaps most famous work, especially in cinema, but then also underscoring the centrality of experimentation with time and space in the canvas.
Well, the biggest blessing is having you think about the work and talk about it. I'm still not used to this degree of insightful appreciation. Fuses had a long life of being confused with pornography, because in my culture there was no sensuousness, and especially depicted or evolved by a female artist that wasn't confused with pornography. Those were our erotic iconographies at the time. So this work was so contrary to cultural expectations that I'm still really in shock. I'm confused by this appreciation. The whole wonderful, coherent realm of installations at PS1 that depletes the culture's insistence on my work as being narcissistic and self-defining and obsessed with areas of denied eroticism. So to have the complete complexity of the materiality of my engagement, that's just, I'm amazed. It's so wonderful, and here we all are. Yeah, what was the question?
That phrase, the materiality of the engagement, I would like to perhaps linger on that a little bit longer. If we consider the second floor of PS1, in which you enter the gallery space and proceed through many of your most accomplished and monumental canvases. And here we see a shot just from yesterday of those canvases presented, which then culminate with Meet Joy, again compelling the viewer, I think, to consider your experimentation with the picture plane and the infusion of energy and dynamic relations upon the canvas surface in relation to the kinetic theater works such as Meet Joy and their presentation in cinema. That we are asked to give close consideration of these canvases and these painting constructions, as you call them, before and with and through the kinetic theater and experiments in film.
Well, I never thought that the kinetic work would dominate the painting, the visual essence, the training, the rigor, my insistence that I'm a painter and that everything I do with various materials comes out of the discipline of painting. And that painting is about perception. It's not conceptual as such. It's about studying form, drawing 8 hours a day, looking at a leaf for 8 hours a day. It's contemplative, and it belongs, in my naive assumption, it belongs to the history of painting, because that's where I was learning what I wanted to do, even though it was denigrated and I was told, you might be gifted, but you're only a girl. So one persists, and now that those definitions have shifted completely, at least for now again.
And it's challenging those definitions, I think, especially on terms of gender and sexuality, the politics that were absolutely imminent to those experiments that I think is important to underscore. That you are thinking with and through the materiality of your body, the body of your associates, as well as the body of paint, of the canvas, activating those surfaces and that corporeal character of the tools as well as the lived experience. Here's another nice moment I thought in the PS1 presentation. When you encounter gift science adjacent to Meet Joy is fractured and broken within the glass pieces of this box from 1965. I think for me, underscoring the interrelation between your investigations with something like the box series of that time, contemporaneous with Meet Joy and your projects of kinetic theater with the Judson Dance Theater.
I'm very fond of gift science. That's the title of this 3-unit installation that has moving parts, lights that move, and it's based on gifts from artists coming from Europe who found odd things as parts of Americana. What do you call the light the little motor that will always move if it has light near it, a positive and negative charge in its arms? I forget what it's called, and
I'm forgetting right now too.
Yeah, well, we know what it is. Yeah. And anyway, the light on the top came from Daniel Spurry, who was visiting from Paris and found this little odd token of this little sort of science toy. And then in the middle, there's, I think it's in the middle, there's a bird that Armand, a stuffed little phony bird. And in the middle, there's also some scores framed as slides from Varese, the composer, with whom I worked briefly as his archivist. That meant that he had drawers with all kinds of clippings from being famous and regarded for his music throughout Europe, and these were all yellowed and crumpled and crushed and thrown into various drawers, and my job was to pull them out and clip them and give them a nice adhering background. So there's Varese in it, and Filiu, the wonderful French poet. He brought another element that moves with a little light on it. So gift science was this accumulation of miniature kinetics.
The notion of the miniature kinetics is really helpful, I think, in considering, for example, gift science as a sequence of boxes, of scenes that evoke as well the film frame that you would be working over and painting upon in something like fuses. Thinking of each film cell as a kind of space in relationship to time, and that has always been an especially important relation for you, I recall. That dynamic between space and time across both the film frame as well as the canvas, and then in a way extrapolated literally into depth with something like gift science.
Well, I had to make fuses because there was no depiction of traditional heterosexual pleasure. And once I began filming the intimate sexual life with my partner, James Tenney, and people knew about it, they started bringing me porno films to look at as if this would help me. So I didn't know how I could transcribe the declivity, but I was sure that whatever I was going to do, it wasn't going to be what porno found as its structure and intention. And once I was teaching myself film, which was really the magic of editing, like thousands of little frames that could be considered tiny paintings in sequence, in motion. And so the scores that I made for them were very odd. I just had these notes that would say, yellow legs, 1, 2, 5, 7, 8, 9, blue, 5, blue, 2 red. So it was almost like a color chart of momentum and intercutting very fluidly that would continue for me the erotic sense, the sense of the skin of the body embedded in these tiny frames. And that was this rhythmic structure, and it was very complex because it went on for a real duration, and all that editing had to be coherent and broken and repositioned.
That's relationship of breaking and construction, I think, comes into vivid focus with something like I-Body, 36 transformative actions for camera, which is given a really beautiful presentation at PS1, and the notion of a sequence of images, of presentations within a space that you have worked over so intensively, that being in particular for cutting boards here and here on the back, thinking both not simply in terms of the display of a body in space, but the dynamic between figure and ground, body as landscape, no longer simply limited to medium-specific ideas or discrete borders between disciplines or particular mark-making strategies, but as an environment, a media condition in a way, in which these amazing photographs are composed with and through something like four-foot cutting
these
boards.
amazing photographs were considered absolute narcissistic bullshit. I kept them in a cigar box. I showed them to various curators whom I felt were adventurous, and they all said, "This is a pile of crap. If you want to paint, put your clothes on and paint." Why was it so difficult for the culture to do anything with this until 20, 25 years had passed? That's crazy.
To hazard one of many guesses, and that there's been such outstanding analysis, I think, and writing with these projects. The way that you disturb the relationship of the body as and its iconographic capacity. That there is a challenge here, a force, an agency to your participation. This isn't simply a display, but rather a confrontation.
Yeah, I had no idea that the body, that using my body as an extension and a part of my painting and sculpture materials, that it would dominate them, that was always astonishing and bewildering. I thought that it was going to be incorporated in a way that traditional nude images could not be incorporated as part of a lived experience and a materiality which belonged to the artist as well as to what the artist could produce. I like these a lot.
Yes? Great. So I think this is a great way of moving to body house, parts of a body house, a series of drawings in watercolor with highly evocative notations on them, in which you are proceeding into this notion of the body as an environment and in dynamic relation to other media, and they're so funny too.
They're really funny, and I'm so fond. Is there more of them? Do you have more of the sequence here?
Well, I'm
Wait,
posing.
what's that kitchen? That's not my kitchen.
It is not your kitchen. I'm posing a bit of a comparison here. A bit of a comparison to suggest some of the distinctions between your investigations with others at the same time. In this case, Woman House of 1972, and to draw some contrast with the humor, the investigation in each and the other. That one is not, let's say, more effective or cogent, but rather they are two kinds of conversation happening at the same time.
Yeah, well, traditional strong feminists at the time rejected this work quite fiercely. They said the degree of its eroticism was pandering to male fantasies. It was almost impossible for me to claim my vision of the body as being radicalizing and feminist. Is there another image of the body house? Yeah.
Here, this one, Heart Cunt Chamber especially, I think works in vivid contrast with, for example, Martha Rossler's House Beautiful, Bringing the War Home. In this particular image, the iconography of the curtains parting, I think, underscores the distinctions in those critiques.
Well, as a body of drawings, it's interesting that these are still in my cupboard. Yep.
Still in your cupboard. Well, also another part of parts of the body house is its life in text, in writing, and writing has always been such a crucial part of your work, such a crucial component of your realization of many of these projects, and the vivid language of parts of a body house in particular, I think, is a wonderful companion to those works in watercolor. I'm curious if you could perhaps speak a little bit more about your process in writing and how Body House came about. It seems to me to be a very crucial transition point between the Kinetic theater projects and then some of the later actions, such as Interior Scroll.
These are questions I can't answer. I don't know how I work, really. It's a mystery. I write a lot because something's growing or burgeoning or disturbing or horrific. And then I edit. I'm a very severe editor. And my writing is very articulate. It's grammatical. It's in the best tradition of thinking about how to compose with English. And I'm just lucky with that. That doesn't come from any family tradition. To the contrary, my family always thought I was using too many big words and embarrassing my brother, and that I should stop that. The whole thing is mystifying. When you're painting, there's this voice that's always inscribing or telling you that you need a slash over there and go down, and that's where the yellow should be, and this line is over-defined. Pull it back, deny it. It's these incredible conversations. I have no idea really where, how they situate themselves. They're just there. It's the same when I lecture or when it's answer and questions. I like all that. and I don't know what's going to happen. I haven't a clue.
Well, this I was posing just as a bit of context to the kind of investigations, the exploratory nature of for example, parts of a body house, the way that you were conceiving of media as an environment, and just as a reference point, especially for the audience, I thought it might be useful to see what other kind of highly contrived, conceited, determinative environments were circulating at this time. That there was a severity to and a stricture, a repression at work, even when there was the claim of euphoric expansion or multimedia experimentation. I see something like parts of a body house as resisting that, pushing against that repression in such generative ways.
I go right back to Gray's Anatomy. My dad was a kind of countryside physician, the old traditional kind with the black bag, and traveling around to help injuries and women giving birth. So my early study books were Gray's Anatomy. I go back to it constantly. So it's that aspect of physical realism that's very inspiring and provocative. And to go further back, I go to Paleolithic shards, inscriptions and sculptures that I make my own interpretation that these are configurations of women's lived experience given form. And they have nothing to do directly with the superimposition and the occlusion, the clouding of patriarchal reinterpreting these works by ancient women, and that they are not goddesses and handmaidens or muses. They're reliquaries of literal experience.
That's beautiful language in itself. These reliquaries of, you're describing it so vividly and so provocatively in the language itself. The way that your descriptions move with and through projects such as Snows, I think, is very helpful to keep in mind. How the notion of a body as something fraught with a host of social historical forces, trying to contend at the level of the image against those forces. And for example, in Snows, the use of tinfoil is, I think, a really beautiful example of that the body becomes a screen as much as it is also an image.
Yeah, but the tinfoil is also interesting because I needed great refractive and reflective surfaces and built these water lenses, which were precarious and crazy, because if they leaked, we'd be blowing up all the equipment, all the electrical installation. But I had to get a lot of tinfoil, and of course it's being made by Reynolds, who manufactured the napalm that's giving me the images of all the Vietnamese places and people set on fire and running through flame. So I have the same ingredients for the destruction of my image sources, the people and their places, as what I'm going to use on the figurations that we're going to wrap each other up in this tinfoil as a kind of metaphor for napalm. So I have to write to Reynolds Wrap, and what am I going to say? I'm doing an anti-Vietnam War installation and need rolls and rolls of your tinfoil. No, I write them and I say, I'm a kindergarten teacher, and I work with injured and blind children, and I teach them how to sculpt with tinfoil. Could you help us? Oh boy, we got piles of tinfoil. Well, thank you for the applause. At the same time, I was advising draft resistors, and I had devised a system of sleep deprivation and terror of the powerful father, And in the countryside, in my part of my house, I set up a room where friends whose boyfriends or sons were truly horrified and against being inducted would work with me for a weekend, and none of them ever got taken. They couldn't take the little hat that we had fetishized. They couldn't take it off. When the officer said, "Take off your hat," couldn't take it off. I couldn't pull down his pants when they said, "Now we have to examine you." So I had this extra artistic license.
This notion of experimentation with the particular circumstances of the social and political of that moment, the way that you are working with the here and now of at that time in Snow's the Vietnam War, resistance against the draft. It's a fascinating context, I think, for something like Flange, a work of just a few years ago, in which some of the formal details of the project suggest a continuity with something like Snow's. The use of tinfoil in the earlier piece. Here now, this molten metal. The politics does not seem to be overtly present in the use of, for example, Vietnam atrocity images as you presented through a film like Viet Flakes and Snows. But here there is a way in which we're immersed in the fires. We are now in those flames, within the condition of perhaps a closer proximity to the consequences of those machines.
Well, Flange is probably the most recent work in the PS1 exhibit. And it starts off with a very simple hallucination. I'm walking somewhere probably in the city, not in the country, and I see a stick. Just a stick kind of floating around in front of me. And I wonder, why am I seeing that thing? And then I thought, well, it could be interesting if I would move it. If it could go this way and that way and this way and that way, that would be interesting. And then I thought, well, maybe there should be a configuration of them. So at that point, I went back upstate to the studio and talked to a student friend about it. And he brought over a vat of wax and a heating element, and I started to make lost wax versions of this stick. And then I was building them into configurations that I knew had to be sculpted and moved. And then I needed an electronic part. I needed a computer chip that would control the movement of these flanges, these arms that were going to be in motion after they were poured, melted and poured into aluminum vats. And that was filmed, and that's how that all evolved. That took a couple years.
And this is on view on the first floor, just around the corner from Fuses. And I think, and then thinking of it within the continuity of some of those formal experiments, such as Snow's, there's a way in which the activation of the object within space becomes so richly at once specific and particular, as well as pervasive, as a sensation, as much as also a thing that is activated by a series of motors at 6 RPMs.
Well, Snow's was insane. It's a play on my name, a name I took because I wanted a big, heavy German name. I had already made my Vietnam atrocity film, Viet Flakes, and I wanted to put it into a lived dynamic and to build this incredible environment it's crazy because I saw the snow branches in Macy's, Gimbals on 6th Avenue, and 32nd Street. I said, I need those. That's exactly what I need for my installation. And 3 nights before it was going to open, I went to the back alley behind Gimbel's, and there were all the snow branches, and my team, we went and we gathered them, we dragged them back. The theater, the Martinique, had been given to me to work with for a month. The director, Paul Libben, was so against the Vietnam War, he said, I don't care if I don't make a penny on this space, I want you to do your work here. So it was full of these incredible coincidences and incredible labor to build the structure for the water lens, because I had wanted a mirror that was 14 feet high and around, and I couldn't get that, so I built these colored water sacks. The environment of projection was going to be controlled by the audience without their knowing it. There were switching systems under every 5th seat, and the switching systems controlled the projection of film and sound and rotating sculptures that were part of the spatial environment. There were microphones under the floor so that when we fell, when we crawled, when we hit it, that would be a certain audible sound layer. What else? There were planks that led from the performance area to the back walls, and the silver walkers would be sent out at some point on to these planks, blindfolded and trying to find their way without falling into the audience. And the audience would be activated to sort of touch their legs and help them not fall. That was part of it, yeah.
And the fascinating dynamic there, what you're mentioning at the end, the way in which they would be, the silver walkers would be blindfolded and proceed out on planks into the middle of the audience, and then be dependent upon the audience for assistance, for direction, to be sure that they wouldn't fall. This notion of codependence between support and agent, I recall, is also something very particular to Snows, and the sense of aggressor and victim as interchangeable positions, a very rich ambivalence between these two places. Again, kind of the figure ground, the environment and the object in dynamic relation.
And what you just said about the codependence, that's crucial to the structure of Water Light, Water Needle, where each participant, and there's 8 or 12 of them, has their own journey through the ropes to initiate. But at each point of movement, they will come to another person following their movement intentions, and then you have to collaborate. You're responsible for each other. It starts also, when I think of it, with newspaper event. My very first Kinetic piece, before I ever want to perform. It's a work, an environment of shredded newspapers with the participants given instructions for certain activities they will make with the malleable responsive material, while other participants have instructions to interfere with somebody. Meet Joy is also utterly trusting codependence, and I guess I'll mention that I never wanted to get up and perform. In the early works, I crawled around with a clock and a flashlight, and I crawled around the periphery of the action, giving signals or instructions. It was only when I had to teach my participants the movements that I wanted them to follow based on a series of drawings, kinetic drawings, that I had to do the movements myself. So if I could do it, I could teach them, and then that could evolve.
This notion of interdependence and the relation and that would go into your teaching is, I think, helpful for just a moment in thinking about another project that you're producing at this time, the Electronic Activation Room, which you described as an auto documentation event. And it was also a self-annihilation project, you described it as, in which the documentation of something like Michoi, here seen in the slides at right that are multiplied and broken apart, is in fact coming apart. It's a presentation of your resume and yet also an obliteration of it. See, for example, just to put it in the context of someone like Wolf Ostel and his electronic decollage happening room, I think again we have a very useful context to other projects and conversations that are happening at this time. Vostell perhaps is emphasizing a bit more the iconographic, the more intensely specific images of that time. We can recognize some of them in that slide here at left, whereas you, Carolee, are working ever more deeply into your own projects, trying to in a way investigate further exactly how they were made, both in terms of the media and in a way learning from your own experience in a fascinating sense. And again, your writing is such a crucial key, I think, to this moment. In this particular excerpt from Divisions and Rubble, a project that you made with the Judson Dance Theater in the gallery space, you write that mechanical labyrinths ring us. Mechanical labyrinths ring us. The striving for a way of describing the sensations, the psychophysical relations to those instruments of control and repression, I think, are something that you at once turn inward and begin to atomize your own projects as much as you are continuously creative and productive at this time. This is a very evocative and, for me, very summary collage of many of your concerns at this moment.
You discovered this. This was another lost element, and Ken has brought it to life and written about it, and now I really like it more. Yeah.
It's so vividly, I think, encapsulates some of those ideas at that time. The operations upon the body, especially the woman's body, the gendered nature of that imposition, of the construction at the very most fundamental level of control, of agency, of scientific objectivity as something enforced and imposed upon women.
Well, those early, I'm in London in the early 70s in a kind of temporary exile from home, where I'm still back at home now. And I'm really enraged most of the time at the constant set of obscenities that are directed towards women. In London culture, everything bad was a cunt. You stupid cunt, you idiot cunt. Somebody who drove badly or didn't serve their food on time. So I did a series of writing and images signed Cuntily Snowball from Belsize Park. And I sent them to newspapers and alternative journals questioning this derision. And I was also writing intensive feminist essays at the time and doing collage like these, yeah. But these don't really find their context. Again, it's going to take another 15, 20 years, and suddenly they make sense in terms of political, social understanding.
Would you like to speak at all about interior scroll in this context with these images? Or I've moved quickly past these, but I just to pause for a moment. It's of course a work that is so well known, and as you've described, it's in a way displaced so many other of your projects. But even then, an image like this, I think, begins to displace the iconographic quality of the more well-known images and begins to underscore interior scroll as something existing with and through a range of social and political issues that we're dealing with, not simply, let's say, a so-called immediate performance, but one that is conditioned through a mediated arrangement. Here with the, I think, almost menacing presence of these male photographers and videographers.
It was censored constantly. I had no idea. It was a little dream. It was, as some of you know, it was just a dream that I drew in the morning, a little simple action of extracting a text. There it is, yeah. And what did it say? What's the message? It says,
The message.
what?
Just the message.
What?
The message.
Thematic?
The message. That's all.
The
it
message. Yeah, it just says the message. Yeah, there's a message from interiority. And I type it out, and many months after the dream, as some of you know, I'm at a festival in East Hampton, and the women are organizing events and say, please do something. And this was like the monkey on my back. I thought, well, if I can enact this, it'll mean something more. But I had no idea it was going to enter the culture. It's going to be censored. I'm losing jobs because of it. Trustees in museums say she does pornography. We can't show any of her work whatsoever. It really makes a lot of trouble, which only reifies the extent of taboo surrounding the vagina, from which almost every mammal that we can conceive of enters this life. So we're conditioned to believe you're born out of the thigh, out of an extra rib, out of the forehead of some god, and anything that's a visceral, lived physicality of female life is going to be deformed, lied about, and vilified. So that's all behind my dream for this. And then it starts to permeate thinking about the body slowly and in a mysterious way. Now everybody knows it, and most young women art students are doing their version of it. Guys are doing anal versions of it. So
Perhaps this is a good time to think through the continuing relevance of some of the ideas that you were just describing now. The contention around the body, the gendered nature of power and its enforcement, the resistance that you faced with many of these projects. And someone like Wilhelm Reich was so crucial for your thinking at that time, and something like the mass psychology of fascism seems to be absolutely required reading for today.
it should be required reading for today rather than relegated to some part of a neuroticized political history. So yes, Reich for Jim Tenney, and for me the writings were really inspiring and supporting. I'm also reading Beauvoir at the time. We're reading Freud. We're reading Jung. And of course, Artaud. Artaud is helping me shred and tear and take emergent forms into my own hands, yeah.
So it's in a way it's Reich not simply as a theorist per se, but as a modality of engagement with the environment and its materials. His designs, for example, the orgone energy accumulator, I think are helpful to have in mind. He was making these orgone boxes. I think we could say that something like Meatjoy is an orgone energy accumulator of its own kind, just without the walls, without the pretenses of a scientific premise, but rather a dynamic of energy exchange, of energy transfer between the participants, and between the participants and the audience. And that's something I think that's also at work in Up to and Including Her Limits, which is given a great place within the second floor of MoMA PS1. Would you be willing to speak at all about up to and including her limits.
Yeah, no, I'm so thrilled. It's seen. I tried to show this work for 20 years. No one would say yes to show it. No college gallery, no gallery. So here it is. And I guess it really had its own dynamic starting through the photographs. And I'm grateful to all the photographers who have documented works when the works themselves are being suppressed or denied. Yeah, I'm just so thrilled that here it is. And it was featured in the retrospective originated by Sabine Breitwasser that starts in Salzburg, then goes to Frankfurt to the amazing, is it the MK Museum? MMK? Yeah, it looked amazing and it's wonderful. Here at PS1, finally, at last, it seems like it's got a home base because it's a very American work. It certainly was inspired by Pollock and the abstract expressionists, and it's, integrated now into this cultural context. But it starts with a tree surgeon's harness and my neighbor trimming the apple tree. And when I saw the rope and the harness, it related to my work with the 3/4-inch middle rope that lined water-light water needle. And I thought that looks interesting to go in that harness. And then I found that I could use tree surgeons' knots to raise and lower myself. And then I saw that with the extension of the body out of the harness, it would form a kind of frame for drawing. That's how it started.
A frame for drawing. It's fascinating. Could you perhaps, I'm curious, would you elaborate a little further on the stacks of monitors that are adjacent to this drawing field, this frame for drawing? And then there's the projection, the 16 millimeter, or is it Super 8 film projector, Super 8, without any film in it, simply the light. Could you perhaps speak about the relationship between drawing here and those media objects in the space?
Well, I'm devoted to drawing, and I'm always trying to find a way to escape my own drawing skills. I need an interference. I need a disruption. I need another kind of momentum to initiate drawing. And so this was a big step in that direction. Sometimes I've been drawing blindfolded, but many artists do that. This was more of an achievement because it involved the entire body as a kind of pen, as the agency of marking.
The entire body as the agency of marking. This seems to be in kind of a dynamic relation to something like Interior Scroll, where the body is seen as I would say, not without a little humor and irony, as the source of the message, of a message, that it's a message from interiority. But now the body is like a pencil, like a crayon, like a mark-making device.
There's a very strange thing when I'm doing the work, suspended in the harness, the rope, if I'm just completely relaxed and kind of suspended in the harness, there's an energy that starts through the rope and it will move. And I believe I've had no intention in that. There's something that simply accumulates through my body into the rope and it begins to move. And sometimes it would move very kind of violently, fiercely. The way you can have those pendulums and test whether you like the food or it likes you or not, and the little things move on the cord. Yeah.
I thought we could then shift to More Wrong Things of 2000. This is also on the second floor in a gallery of its own. I was impressed by the heat of the television monitors in walking into that room. There was a distinctive change in the atmosphere The radiation from the monitors was quite intense. I had this sensation of the monitors both as image conveyance devices, as presenting representations, but then themselves were such a almost leering imposition within the space, a kind of dark, potent object weighing upon me, almost like a about to be sprung, that they would perhaps drop from those wires.
I never thought about how much heat they generate, because they've always been in larger spaces. And it was recently, 2 years ago, exhibited in a medieval museum. And it was exquisite there, with these crenellated ceilings and the disaster images fluttering and floating and being transported through that space. But the work started very simply when a very special cat, a stray cat that I named Treasure, who traveled with me all over the country and was an amazing, ecstatic creature. The cat was starving, abandoned, lost, found up in Binney Water near where I live by a neighbor, and everything about the cat was just joyful, and he was funny, and he had a funny sense of humor, and he would do yoga when he saw a woman doing yoga, and I loved this cat. And he was suddenly killed mysteriously one night, and I'm used to animals dying, but this one just was unbearable, to lose this special cat. And so I photographed his corpse, and that became sort of the talismanic index to unexpected, serendipitous films being sent from different parts of the world and from different areas of disaster. Yes, there's that. So there's the dead cat image, and then Sarajevo sent me a whole collective. The last films that they're ever going to make, they're out of water, they're out of food, their homes are destroyed, and they're sending the last group footage of the disaster surrounding them to a friend of mine in LA, and then they're sent to me. And then there's footage from Haiti. I have my Vietnam footage, and I have some very ancient footage of disasters, and that's when I begin to build more wrong things. It's a compendium.
I'm curious to know a little more about what compelled you to suspend the monitors in space and amongst so many wires, more wires than perhaps seem necessary to power the monitors, to fix them in space. There is something tactile and confrontational in the arrangement and the composition of the installation, as much as also confrontational in the imagery on them.
Well, they're more like film or sculpture. They're more malleable. They're not that same insistent focus that you have with your one monitor, where your information is all concentrated and we're all conditioned and trained to look at this one confining frame. It's kind of simple. Put them around, and walk among them.
So there's an expectation upon the visitor to navigate among those images, to physically proceed amongst them in the tangle of wires, to try and kind of perhaps find a new way around those atrocity images, those so many wrong things that seem to be more and more wrong things, and yet maybe there's a way to negotiate that, to find a way through.
Well, this gives you a flexibility with them. You're not frozen in front of them. It depends on the space and the energy where the viewers can move within them and around them. It varies every installation. Yeah.
It's quite intense at PS1 there. I'm not sure that this picture here quite that I made quite does it justice. The irradiation and the mass of wires that you navigate amongst. But that seemed to me to be, as I mentioned before, just a nice way of connecting to something like up to and including her limits, where there is a notion of limits that are transcended, a situation, a concentration of forces of images or objects in a space that here for you are arranged for your own experience. It's up to and including her limits. But perhaps with something like More Wrong Things or other projects, there is a way in which our own limits are tested.
Yeah, well, my limits are still tested with my Vietnam footage. I'm still very upset with it all the time. And in the meantime, I'm working with accumulated disasters of corpses from Syria. And that's an overwhelming nightmare of naked, tortured, starved men, not military men, ordinary men grabbed off the street, grabbed out of university, grabbed on their way to work, starved, tortured, and thrown into these heaps and piles. There's thousands of them, and the photographer barely escaped with his life from Syria with these photographs. And they've been at the UN, where they're trying to establish culpability. In the meantime, I've just been surrounded with them for over a year. They're like another family of atrocities. People are very unnerved when they see them. Why was I thinking of that now?
I was suggesting this relation of limits that you are exploring with something like this project, up to and including her limits. But then what I imagine is that you're trying to find a way in which we might confront our own limits of either witnessing, of confronting these images, making sense of them, not looking away.
Yeah, I tend to want to show the things that are forbidden to look at. And our culture, which is always righteous and self-justifying, doesn't want to see what we actually can accomplish militarily, the degree of destruction that we support.
And so with something like Flange, one of your more recent projects, to just bring it in a way back to where we began the conversation and thinking about the most recent investigations, I'm curious to know if you could speak more about what you might be doing with those Syrian images. Do you have a sense of how to intervene with something like Flange, beginning with experiments in watercolor and crayon, a play between abstraction and representation? There's such a rich precedent of strategies that you've developed to deal with those images, from Dark Pond, Terminal Velocity, the Vietnam imagery. Do you have a sense of where you might next proceed in something like that, in that investigation?
No, because the degree of success now and appreciation, the full entrance of the work into the culture has me completely hypnotized or numb. I have no feeling for making work at all now, none. Not now, no, not yet.
Well, to bring it back to where we started, as you leave MoMA PS1, you're confronted with eye-body collage from just a few months ago. This notion of creative destruction, of rending, of tearing apart, the separation that perhaps also becomes a means of binding, of achieving greater connectivity, seems so rich in this piece in particular. It's an absolutely beautiful way, I think, to confront and confound a visitor to the show, and then perhaps for us to also begin to develop our own modes of investigation, our own negotiation through these images. Was there anything more you perhaps would like to share about this work in particular, or?
Yeah, but I'm very happy with the rhythms. And again, I questioned the process and what does it mean to do this intensity of torn motion, to rehabilitate the originating images. But now I'm pleased with its energy. That's really all I know about it.
I think that quality of energy, of an energy transfer is found throughout the exhibition. I find that to be some of the most affirming attributes of the show. The way in which I think we each are challenged to understand our relationships to an image, to abstraction, to representation in new ways. Would you like to, just in the final moments here, would you like to say anything further about some of these recent publications of your work? We spoke briefly about your writing, and this is an absolutely essential volume of your texts.
Well, this was just printed. This is amazing. I had nothing to do with this. I didn't edit it. I didn't design it. I didn't approve it. And it's wonderful. I'm absolutely thrilled. Brandon Joseph and his researchers, much in the way that you investigate the history of my work, they found all this material and decided what should be in a book of uncollected texts, which I wrote. And so it's all very surprising and exciting. When I look in there, I say, oh, this is the essay I really liked, and here it is. And I hope all of you will have a chance to look at it. I'm very pleased with this publication. It's brand new. It just came out a couple weeks ago. Yeah.
Well, that seems to be an absolutely perfect place, I think, to conclude our conversation for today with just a last note of encouragement to see the exhibition on view until tomorrow, March 11th. Please check it out. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Thank you, Carolee.